Welcome back to another episode of Fourth Trimester Voices. Today, I have Christele Robinson, who is coming on the show to tell us about her story. So, Christele is a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. We met at work, and so many common experiences. Our daughters are about the same age, they play, and we have definitely talked about Christele's birth story multiple times. Her first and second baby, she went through a lot. And so, I'm really happy that she came here to share with you all about her experience in hopes to inspire and hopes to encourage another mom who's going through the same thing. So, Christele, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today. So
Yes,
excited to
yes.
talk.
Thank you for having me. I'm definitely excited to talk about the experience because I think we need to share our experiences, especially given that a lot of times we want it to go one way, and then when it doesn't go another way, it's kind of navigating that process. And so definitely happy to talk about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about the first baby. Just talk about leading up to having Naya, just your
Mhm,
experience with pregnancy and just that excitement that you had with
mhm,
Devin.
mhm. So it's really interesting because I was nervous about the first time around because you hear these stories about nausea, vomiting, morning sickness, all these things, gestational diabetes. I didn't have anything. My
Mm,
pregnancy was really smooth. Honestly, it was a great experience. And so I was just really thankful because I thought something was going to happen and nothing happened.
mm,
So really was excited when the time came to actually deliver the baby in a sense, but that's kind of when everything started going wrong with the labor and delivery experience. Because again, the pregnancy was so smooth, I was surprised about the labor and delivery experience. So, labor and delivery experience, my water broke at the clinic, which I
mm.
was like, okay, great. This is all in a controlled setting. This is everything is fine. And then I went to the hospital to what I thought get ready to deliver the baby, but ended up staying in the waiting room for about 4 to 5 hours, leaking meconium on the floor. I was given a pad, which was great, but at the same time, I was just surprised. Being a healthcare worker and working in a setting where you see that things are a little fast paced, but at the end of the day, if a person is delivering a baby, that you would think you would go back to a room sooner, that it took some time to get back to the room. I remember going
Mm.
into this small area, which honestly I wouldn't even call a room, but I would even call it triage. I went to the room,
Mm.
they checked to make sure I was okay, my vitals were fine, the baby's vitals were fine, and then I went back into the waiting room. And so that whole time I was obviously dealing with the cramping, contractions, still trying to figure out what's going on because I didn't know what to expect. And I think I finally got to room about maybe like between 7 and 9 hours
Oh
after
my
presenting.
gosh.
In hindsight, found out that I should have been a direct admit to the hospital.
Mm.
And so to the point, like I remember asking the OBGYN that was on call, like, hey, can I transfer to another hospital? Like still having that
Wow.
whole understanding of like, hey, I understand you guys are busy. Can I go somewhere else? And even presenting that. And they're like, no, because your water broke, you're not stable enough to transfer. And so still just kind of going along the way, in a sense, trusting that they knew what was best. And I think that's what can happen a lot of times is that you're trusting other people to know what was best rather than
Mm.
trusting yourself and what you feel like your baby is telling you or what your body's telling you or what maybe your loved one that's there is telling you.
Mm.
So that was very interesting, kind of navigating an uncontrolled setting in a sense,
Wow.
but still in a sense not listening to myself. And I think the first time around, I didn't trust my gut a lot, which is very different
Mm.
from second time around. But first time around, I didn't trust. With that being said, doctors are great. I think very much so shared decision making with every doctor that I met. Nursing's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Had some, had some great nurses, had some that weren't as receptive to my concerns. But
Mm.
again, realizing that even though like I'm a healthcare worker, that I am going to have to advocate for myself. And I'm thankful that I had loved ones with me. My best friend, who's OBGYN, came and surprised
Mm.
me. My husband was there, mother was there. And so I think because of all that, I definitely felt supported and backed when I felt concerned about something. And
Mm.
as things started progressing, I realized I need to speak up more because I shouldn't have been in the waiting room for 7. hours.
Yeah, I want to go back to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Here you are, you're in labor, essentially, or your
Hmm.
water broke.
Yep.
You should be hooked up. They should be checking your baby. They should be
Yep.
monitoring contractions,
Yep.
and you are in the waiting room.
Yep. Mind blowing. Yep.
Like
To the
I'm concerned. Like I'm concerned
yes.
hearing the story because like that should not be occurring, especially if you're leaking meconium. So much could happen. You could be developing an infection. What
I
was the
did.
reasoning? What was the reasoning?
It was just, again, they were just overloaded with patients, which, again, I understand that being in the environment I work in, which is why
Mm,
I came up with the solution of, hey, can I just be transferred? But unfortunately, I couldn't. And so eventually, I should have said, I went back to a room. I should have said a curtained area first. First
mm.
went to a curtained area, so maybe more a triage, and then finally went to my room about 9 hours after first getting there, to the point where I think I mentioned that my best friend, who's an OBGYN, she surprised me in the waiting room. So didn't even have a
Mm,
room to greet me in, like just met her there. And even she was trying not to say anything, but realized, she's like, you need to be back in a room. Like this doesn't make sense. So
mm,
even again, starting to realize that she's an OBGYN, she's saying, hey, like you need to be back in a room, which is now kind of getting me a little anxious because I'm like, okay, this is
mm.
not how this is supposed to go. So it's still, again, just very mind blowing that that happened and that I was just in the waiting room for so long.
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, yeah. And you
Mm,
mentioned infection. That did happen. Yep. That
mm.
was part of the complications. I did and end up developing an infection. Actually, and ended up developing like a urinary tract infection, as well as drawing a blank on the name. It was like,
Is it a bloodstream
right?
infection
No,
or
like, is it endometritis?
endometrial uterine infection?
Yes, yes. So I ended up having
Mm,
both postpartum. So after I ended up having a C-section, which, going back to that shared decision making, like the good thing is that they tried everything and it was very much, this is the next step, this is the next step. And then eventually having to get to the place of having to get a C-section was what ended up happening, which goes back to, again, I had my doula there. I was thinking everything was going to be natural. Um,
mm.
which that ended up not being the case. I had to get an epidural, be on Pitocin, which was fine because I think I understand that labor and delivery doesn't always go the way you planned, which is
Right.
something I think that needs to be shared more because
Mm,
go in with your birth plan. And I think if you don't have that understanding before, that your birth plan a lot of times doesn't, it honestly just goes out the door. And
yeah.
I think that right there, just shifting your mentality to realize like this is not something that you will be able to control because there's so many factors of what happens to mom, what happens to baby. So that's something that I think
Needs to be spoke
helped me,
about. Yeah.
that needs to be spoken about, and also that helped me the second time. So I
Mm,
had a theoretical birth plan the second time around, but was very much so flexible with what needed to happen based off of the shared decision making, which I think
mm,
that's something I can speak to. Like both of my experiences, which ended up being at different hospitals, there was shared decision making, I will say, from the providers, which I think is really good.
mm.
That
Good.
happened with helping, but at the end of the day, it's still your birth plan goes out the window.
Yes. Yeah, I think I always talk about that because I feel like for a lot of moms, this is a huge deal. And moms don't really realize how traumatic it is until later on. And so I try to encourage our moms who are listening, who are pregnant, and say, yes, create a birth plan, but also have these conversations with your doctor about the what ifs. Because
Hmm.
I don't know if that the conversations are not being had, or as moms, we are not wanting to address the deviations. I don't know who needs to have the or initiate this conversation, if it needs to be mom or the OBGYN needs to have this without scaring moms. So I don't know their thoughts on that one because I think it's a difficult conversation
It
from
is.
the OB's perspective too.
And some of that too is like the focus a lot of times is like what's going to happen during the 9 months. And unless you take like the course before delivering a baby, which some moms may not do that, you may not have a good understanding of what labor and delivery is going to be. That it may not just
Mm,
be this miraculous, your water breaks, contractions happen, and in a couple hours you have a baby. I think that's the part that having a doula was very, very great. And I had a doula both times, even though
Mm,
I ended up having C-sections. I had a doula, which I think that helped a lot with understanding what labor and delivery is going to be. So I think
mm,
the OB, I think, gives a lot of good information when it comes to like pregnancy, but
yeah.
having that support in a doula, I think, was very important. And my OB was very honest with me too about kind of what labor and delivery looks like and just kind of don't push it. Like I wanted to have a VBAC second time. And she
Mm,
was, you can trial it, it's fine, but also just be realistic that it could end in C-section, which
mm,
we had those frank conversations. But then again, like I also want to have those direct conversations because I knew the first time labor and delivery went completely out of control.
mm,
And so I think it's both. I think it's going back to being an advocate for yourself, asking those questions, talking to your friends, talking to other moms, asking them about, and it's interesting because I think we're talking more about it now, which is great.
mm-hmm,
Like I have women that are just like, I'm so scared. My pregnancy is going great, but then I'm like, I'm scared about labor and delivery because they're having those conversations. But at
mm.
least it's in their back of their mind. Like I have two coworkers that had to deliver their babies at 25 weeks. So
Wow.
it's just you just don't know what can happen. But I think platforms like this, where we're talking more about it, I think is important just so you can understand, like, yes, you have pregnancy, you have labor and delivery, and then you have postpartum, which
Mm.
I'd probably get into that too. But it's just like it's those three phases and stuff. And I think
Yeah.
because my pregnancy was smooth both times around, well, I should say because my pregnancy was smooth the first time around, I was
Mm.
open to having another one. And I think with that second experience, that the labor and delivery still was a little crazy.
Yeah.
I ended up calling a code met on me because I needed backup support during the C-section to get my son out, and he had to go to the NICU because of everything. But what I realized is the hospital very, how to say, like they're very targeted on service and making
Mm-hmm.
sure mom is okay, which I really appreciated that. So like nursing was amazing, physicians were amazing, which I think helped to realize like, hey, my baby's not in the room, my baby's at another hospital. So that postpartum time I think was a lot better during that
That's
experience. I
second.
think about like the differences between like my first pregnancy and labor and delivery and my second one.
Yeah. I'm gonna back up to your first one a little bit because I
Yeah.
know just, yeah. So you had your first pregnancy. It ended up in a C-section. And it sounds like you got an infection. How many days later did you get an infection with the first baby?
Got an infection so I remember being there a total of 5 days. So 2 days to actually deliver.
Mm,
So ended up having the C-section the morning of, I think going into like the third day of being there. Developed an
mm,
infection within about 24 hours, I would say postpartum after
mm,
having a baby. And it was interesting because going back to you have to be an advocate for yourself if things
mm,
just don't seem right. I just remember having a smell and I was having chills. And I remember mentioning it to the nurse, and she kind of was like, "Oh, this is normal. This is what happens." And I'm like, "Oh, I feel like I'm
mm.
having chills. I'm like, I'm smelling my urine. It just doesn't smell right." And so I told her, I was like, "I appreciate your insight. However, I would like to speak to the OBGYN just to make sure." And then ended up finding out that I did have a urinary tract infection. And she started me on antibiotics for the endometritis as well, because I was having those chills and, in a sense, meeting that SIRS criteria, which then again, the OB listened to my concerns, which I appreciated that. However, the nurse
Mm,
didn't. And so you have to trust your gut and what's going on with you and your baby for sure.
that's really great advice because
Mhm,
I think a lot of moms would in that situation may have said, okay, well, the maybe it's in my mind, or maybe the nurse is right.
mhm,
Maybe it's nothing. Let me not say anything. And so kudos to you for speaking up to yourself because I feel like that could have led to complications, right? If you
mhm.
could have been septic, you could have got a bloodstream infection. It could have gotten really bad if they didn't pick that up early. Oh
Exactly.
man. So you leave the hospital after 5 days, and how was your postpartum experience given you just went through this traumatic childbirth experience? You've had this now uterine infection. How is the next 12 weeks after you gave birth to Naya?
Yeah, so one thing as you were speaking, I'm like, I also ended up I had to see dermatology. I ended up having
Mm,
a rash that happened all over my legs. I forgot what the term is
is
called,
it
but
pups?
Yes, 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 yes. Ended up
Yes.
having that. And they're like, it's only something related to pregnancy. So meanwhile, I'm like in the bed and I'm just like scratching. They're like, don't scratch, don't do this. And dermatology came to see me. And before even leaving the hospital, it hit me. And I was just like, I cried so much because I was just like, what is happening? I was like, this
Mm,
is so hard. Like, just recovery was difficult. That first time you have to kind of cough. You feel like your C-section is going to rip open. And it's just kind of just navigating that, I think was just mind-blowing
mm,
and realizing that, like, I don't know if there's anything that could have been done to prepare for those things, to be honest.
mm,
I still remember when the person that wants to take the photographer comes to take the photos and me and my husband were like, we don't want to see anybody. Like, we don't feel good right now. Like, we're not in
yeah.
the mood to take photos. We're gonna just skip this because it was just one thing after the next. Again, it was
Mm,
C-section to now I'm having an infection, endometritis, UTI, and now I
mm,
have to have pups. And so it's just like back to back things. And I'm just like, what is happening?
mm,
And then now you have to go home and deal with a new baby. And it's interesting because I think going home was very difficult because I think one thing at the hospital, you have the additional support of the nurse or the physician that you
mm,
readily call. And then you go home and you're like, okay, what are we doing? Thankfully, I had support. Like my mom was there, my husband was there, had a lot of friends that like stopped by, just making sure everything was okay. So it felt like I was supported, but still realizing that I think I was mourning the birth experience,
mm,
realizing that there was no sense of control. And I still remember my mom and my husband had to sit me down, I think like day two of going home, and they're like, hey, you can't control everything. Like we're trying our best. And I think
mm,
that was my way of trying to get some type of control back for what was completely an uncontrollable experience of trying to say, like, we have to stay on top of feedings. We got to stay on top of this. We got to do this. And I think this kind of down the line, realizing second time around, my mom and
mm.
husband ended up saying, you did so much better this time than you did last. We're
They're
like, we
like,
didn't
oh
have
my
to,
gosh.
they're like, we didn't have to give you a powwow. We didn't have to sit you down and talk to you. And so
Oh
it's just funny because it was just like, again, I think because I had the mindset of like, I can try to control this, but also just more open with like, God, it's in your hands because
my
literally
gosh.
like I couldn't control.
You
And again,
can't control.
the second time was worse because our son had to go to the NICU and he had to go to a different hospital and he
Mm,
had to breastfeed, I think within like 72 hours, like the first time I would
mm.
actually even try to breastfeed in a sense. And so it's just interesting the differences in
The
that experience.
difference.
But
Yeah.
I still remember, I think a lot of it was going through the motions of what I think I should be doing, but not
Mm,
realizing, like, again, there's no control. Like, you're home, you're trying your best, trying to go through the cycles of what you've learned about, like, they eat, they poop, and then they take a nap, and just you're trying to figure it all out. But at the same time, you're also trying to recover. Whether it's through a vaginal or C-section, you're still trying to take the time to recover. But I think you
mm,
very quickly, like, it's all about baby, 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 which is the first realization of like, okay, there's a change here that's happening. You're
mm,
focusing more on the baby and I think that was also a change for me during like my
mm,
postpartum experience the first time around. I still remember I mentioned like my best friend that mentioned that's an OB. She was like, "Hey, I'm concerned you're kind of this is starting to become more than like baby blues and
mm,
starting to be more concerned like you could be having some postpartum depression." And she was like, if you don't turn around in like a week or two, I really want you to see somebody. With that being said,
mm,
like I started to shift. And honestly, like I remember saying, I'm not liking this. Like, this is not fun. And my husband was like, hey, why don't you just take a moment, go outside, go for a walk, go to the park, go to a happy place. Like, I used to love going
mm,
outside and exercising. And I was just indoors so much. And he was like, go do yourself. So I went, got like a milkshake. And I was just like,
mm,
walk. And it was just so interesting kind of taking that moment for myself, but realizing that I didn't even recognize that that's what I needed. Like, so now I have two
mm,
instances. People that love me are saying, like, hey, like, you need to do something for yourself, but not even realizing, like, I'm going down this rabbit hole because I'm thinking like, oh, this is all normal. Baby blues happens. But I didn't get to that place where I had to see somebody professionally for
Mm,
postpartum. But when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I was experiencing postpartum depression
mm,
for sure. Like
absolutely.
to get to the point where I'm just like crying all the time and just like not wanting to do the things that I normally do. Like
Mm,
all of it seemed like signs of that. But eventually you get through it. I think what helped me a lot was when I felt like I was fully recovered, I was able to like really get back into exercising. And so I think that helped me to kind of cope with a lot of things, whether it was walking or trying to run. And I think that helped me kind of get through like, okay, this is something I can control. This is something that makes me feel good. Like I enjoy being outside. I delivered first baby like during the summer. So again, it was just nice to kind of get outside, enjoy the sun. And I think that helped me process everything. And
yeah,
then realizing that like I do have support. Me and my husband were going to figure this out together. My
yeah.
mom, she came every month. And then just a lot of support from like family and friends, I think really helped to get through that first time around. Honestly, I think happened second time around, which second time around again was more traumatic because our son, we had to go back and forth. So now recovery looks different because I'm now having to go back and forth to the hospital while I'm still trying to recover from a C-section. I'm getting
Mm.
cheered,
Talk
you know?
about talk about that a little bit because I know we haven't kind of touched about that delivery with
Yeah.
DJ. So it sounds like you had Naya, you had to have a C-section because things didn't go as planned, and then you did consult with your doctor, and you had a very supportive doctor who was like, "Hey,
Mhm.
let's go forth and do a VBAC." And so you went through that process. And what happened during that delivery? Was it baby again failed to descend or to progress, and then you had to go to a C-section. Explain a little
Mhm.
bit about that.
So what I didn't know, because I ended up asking the OB that delivered me afterwards when I went to see her postpartum. What I didn't know at the time, it honestly wasn't until having to do the C-section, as I had so much scar tissue,
Mm,
everything was kind of just meshed together, like for my bladder, abdomen, everything was kind of meshed together. And so I think that's also what made the delivery actually difficult because she had to kind of get through all that scar tissue.
mm.
And so one of the things we're thinking is that maybe the scar tissue caused me not to fully dilate because I got to 8 centimeters. I was
Wow.
close, but not close enough. And so, of course, eventually the baby ends up going into distress because now we have meconium again. I'm starting to kind of get those chills. And so showing signs of infection. And so same type of thing where shared decision making was happening and it
Hmm.
was just like, okay, we're going to try one more time. And if you don't get to 10 centimeters, then we're going to have to kind of go down this path of C-section, which
Mm.
because I was at least given the chance to try, I think
Hmm.
that helped more with the decision of that. And with that being said, like VBAC, that's a whole nother conversation to make sure you're a candidate for it. And then making sure, again, you have a team that's willing to help support that. And that's one thing I can say that my OB was very willing and the team that ended up delivering me or seeing me, everybody was supportive of it. But I think at the same,
Good.
I told them up front that I understand that this could lead to C-section. And I think
Mm.
because I kind of understood that up front, it was easy when that time came to have to make the decision, like, okay, let's just stop. You tried your best. And then after when I found out I had all the scar tissue, I was like, I don't know if there's anything I would have been able to do.
Nothing
'Cause,
different.
yeah, I was
Mhm.
like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know if there's anything again I could have done. And and then with that experience, I think being aware of like if they have to call like a code emergency or medical emergency, that this is concerning, but still throughout that time I was just like, okay, everything's gonna be okay. And everything was okay until it wasn't okay. In
Mm.
regards to my son, like we were able to hear him, he was crying, everything was fine until again after seeing him and he was diagnosed with like HIE. And so with that, he had to go to the NICU and had to be therapeutically cooled. And so that was just, I think I was just honestly in the daze at that point because I was just like,
Mm.
where's my son? Son's supposed to be in the room with us.
Mm.
Like, where is he? And didn't even get a chance to hold him. But
Mm.
after that, my husband had to go back and forth to see the baby and recorded videos, and that was our FaceTime, and that was how I was able to see him. And I was really concerned of what my postpartum experience was going to be that time around because that was more
Yeah.
than the first time. But I think going back to, I delivered at two different hospitals. I think that my experience, I went right back as soon as
Mm,
the second time around, as soon as I got there through the emergency department, they took me right back to a room. So
mm,
just the beginning was completely different. And I think that really helped. That helped with kind of the labor and delivery, even though it was traumatic, still being better. Like I was able to be discharged at 48 hours, which usually they recommend about 72 hours for C-section,
for
but
C-section.
I was able to, like, the lactation consultant was great there, was able to help me. So I'm like pumping all this, like everything was fine. Like
Mm,
I thought that the stress was going to really get to me. And it
yeah.
did at times. Yeah, it was like it did at times. I think when I saw our son for the first time, that's when it hit me. But even then, it was just like, okay, this is when you have to hold on to your faith and doing the best we can. And so that was definitely a very traumatic experience. There's still some triggers sometimes because of it, but I
Yeah.
think I got through it better because I understood what recovery looks like postpartum. I knew the value of like, don't hold on any of this in. Make sure you're talking, make sure you are expressing yourself to the best of your ability. And so that was the second time around, like I think I handled things better to the point where I told you like my husband and mom was like, you did this so much better than the time
Wow.
around. And so
I think that's like a really good if you had to compare the two births, right? And the
mhm,
different experiences you had and knowing for a lot of women having a traumatic experience with their first child makes the second child even more of a high risk situation.
mhm,
And for
yeah.
some people that can push them into postpartum depression. And
Mhm,
so I know you touched on tools that you used to
mhm.
be able to have a better experience the second time, but name a couple different things so that our moms who are listening who may have had like a really bad first traumatic pregnancy or childbirth or postpartum experience, what tangible advice can they have to be able to get through to their second baby
Mhm.
experience?
I think for me, first, I can speak to my faith, whatever
Mm,
your faith may be, religion is like having some type of faith that you're able to get through this. For me, a lot of prayer, Bible reading, just that
mm,
was what I had to hold on to because we were in the fire. We were in the fire, and I was like, God's going to bring us out of this. So I will say that first. The second thing was just truly like leaning on loved ones is, I think, going to be very important during that second time around. Like being upfront with, hey, like this is that first time was a very traumatic experience. We're going to need help.
mm,
I think sometimes people don't really know the type of help that they need and the type of support. But the thing is, like, you
yeah.
have this village. Like, a lot of times you do this baby shower, you have all these people come out and support you. These are the same people that are willing to help. You just have to ask. And so I
Mm,
think leaning on the village, I think is very important and stuff like that. Like you sent us food, right? Like that's a
mm,
huge thing, like to be able to say, like, okay, we're gonna get food. Like we don't have to worry about this. Or again, like somebody kind of giving you just a break of like watching your baby for an hour so you can take a nap. Like I think making sure that you're being more vocal about, hey, I need help because this first time was really hard. So the second time, like we need our support system lined up. Like I think that's very important. And then also kind of taking the time to figure out like what are the things that you enjoy, whether it's reading, walking, whatever those things are, and making sure you can hold on to that. So whatever it is that you love before becoming a mother, try to do those things to the best that you can, right? Because sometimes it gets hard.
mm,
But again, even if it's just walking your baby in the stroller, I think all those things kind of help to kind of gain your sense of self as you're navigating now this additional role of being a mother, but still kind of navigating
mm,
yourself during that time. So I think those things were like really helpful. And then one thing that I did second time around that I didn't do first time around that I think was very supportive was finding kind of it was a breastfeeding support group, but
mm,
any type of support group, whether it's again postpartum support group, breastfeeding, whatever it is, I think that was very helpful because then you realize like your experience is not like your own, like other people have had
mm.
traumatic experience and now they're trying to kind of navigate, okay, what does it look like? And I think that helped out a lot was getting involved with this support group because a lot of times it was just like text messages, like it wasn't something where I think we had once a month call, Zoom call, which
Yeah.
sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't, but you're still able to kind of lean on that group of mothers as well. And I think that was something I didn't do the first time, but I did that the second time, and I think that helped out a lot for sure.
Wow,
Mm.
wow. That's good. I'm really proud of you because I still get nervous about even the thoughts of having another child
Mhm.
because
Oh, I don't
I'm
want another one. I
terrified.
don't. Yeah, I was like, I'm good. I was like, what? Because once I learned that there was all that scar tissue, I was like, what is it going to look like this the third
Oh
time?
my
Like, I
gosh.
don't know about that. But yeah, yeah, it's, I think I mentioned the reason I was okay the second time is because pregnancy was fine. And again, pregnancy was great. No
Mm,
complications during pregnancy. It was just labor and delivery again. That was just crazy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I
mm,
think because of that, and honestly, I think the OB actually shared, she was just like, I would recommend if you can control it, like not having another child because of all the scar tissue. And so that was her
mm.
advice, which was backed by my OB best friend too, that mentioned
Wow.
and like, don't do this
Wow.
if you can avoid it to the best of your ability. So,
Absolutely. Well,
mhm.
I want to summarize all the pearls that we got from your story. Number one, right, is you may feel like pregnancy, everything is going great, but
Mhm.
definitely look into childbirth, definitely
Yes.
look into
Mhm.
postpartum, talk
Yes.
to your doctor. You want to make sure you have a great relationship with your doctor. It sounds like you
Yes.
had an amazing OBGYN who allowed you to ask questions, to talk about the what ifs. And then it sounds like you had a really great support system, your mom, Devin, your
Mhm.
circle of friends who were surrounding you. And then the
Mhm.
biggest thing is using your voice and advocating for yourself.
Yes.
You did it initially with the first pregnancy where you were in the waiting room for 8 hours and asking to get transferred. And then all the more when you got the infection and just continuing to advocate yourself. These are all super important things for our moms to hear because at the end of the day, this is your body,
Mhm.
right? This is you only get one body. You have to take care of it. You have to utilize the resources of people around you and you have to use your voice. You really
Mhm.
do.
Mhm. And one thing I want to add, after my first birth experience, I actually did
Mm,
write a letter. Going back to the advocate part, I did write
mm,
a letter to the hospital where I delivered just because I expressed my concerns of this is how everything went. It's kind of getting an understanding of like, why did things happen a certain way? But again, my intent was this is not for me. This is for the mom that maybe doesn't have a healthcare background and
mm.
doesn't understand what can happen during labor and delivery. And so that was my intent. And I was really actually happy that they wrote back and they talked about all the initiatives that they're doing. And
Good.
and they addressed certain things. Like they did mention, like part of the reason why you had an infection could have been because you were in the waiting room for those hours.
Mm,
And so it was nice that they at least followed up. They responded. I felt heard. I felt like I was
mm.
advocating for the mother again that's not as aware of that. And so I was really proud of myself that I took that time to kind of write that letter. And I'm also, again, happy that the hospital actually responded and took the initiatives of this is what we're going to do. This is what we are doing to help those during this time because it is a very
Mm,
difficult time for sure. And so that was something I wanted to add that I did do that. I
mm,
didn't do it the second time around because I felt like that was a great experience. Even if
yeah,
it happened, like there was nothing that could have been done differently, I think, to
yeah.
be honest. But that first time I did write a letter expressing
Mm,
my and stuff. And so I'm happy.
good. And I think that's really important is that sometimes we want to keep quiet when we experience
Mhm.
negative things, in the hospital system. And I learned this working in admin is like people have to voice their concerns for change to happen.
Mhm.
Right. And so if you don't talk about your experience or how somebody treated you or how the experience was, then for the next person, there's somebody who will experience the exact same thing as you and the outcome may be different. And so I think it's powerful for us to give feedback and I'm
Yes.
really happy that you did that for sure.
Hmm. For sure. Mhm.
Well, we are about to wrap up this show and so powerful. Thank you, Christelle. Thank you
Yes,
so
yes.
much. If our listeners want to find you, if you want to be found, how can they reach you?
Well, so I made that face because I am not on Instagram. A lot of people are like, "Wait, you're not on Instagram?" I'm like, Instagram. That's part of like just my balance.
Love
But
it.
I am on Facebook. So Facebook, LinkedIn, either one. is a way that you can connect with me and stuff. So just Christelle Robinson. You can find me on either platform. That is to the extent I can do stuff on Instagram to a certain point, but those things
Yes.
as well. So
Perfect. And if you all have any questions for her, you can always email fourthtrimestervoices@gmail.com. And yes, so moms, you shouldn't have to go through this journey alone. If you are looking for somebody to be with you through this process, to advocate on your behalf in the postpartum period, to treat you medically, to treat you, talk to you, get you to the right resources, whether it's mental health resources, lactation, I would love to help you. Please reach out to me at fourthtrimestervoices@gmail.com. And that is another show. It's been so great talking with you all. Have a lovely day.
thank you.
If you live in the Atlanta, Georgia area, I want you to consider working with EM Care to You. And this is my concierge medical company, and we offer comprehensive care for mothers postpartum. I started the company because I saw a need. I was taking care of so many postpartum moms that had a need, and I wanted to provide a solution for their problem. So at EM Care to You, we provide access to in-home lactation support, pelvic floor physical therapy, mental health support, and more. You can learn more about this at emcaretou.com. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Fourth Trimester Voices. If you have any questions about today's episode or you want to share your story, please email us at fourthtrimestervoices@gmail.com. My name is Dr. Choa, and it's been lovely talking with you all today. Take care.